Good afternoon. This is Janine Lee, President and CEO of the Southeastern Council of Foundations. We appreciate all of you joining us this afternoon, and we realize there may be a few more people that will be coming on, although it looks like we have a nice group already. So we really appreciate you all signing up for this. This is going to be a very exciting discussion for right at an hour. We've got three extraordinary panelists that will be with us, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. The title of this particular webinar is Strategic Planning, Passing Gear Philanthropy. And as I think you all know, this is one in a series of sessions that were designed with community foundations in mind, but we opened this up because passing gear philanthropy is so important to philanthropy in general, and particularly we love presenting the philanthropic lens from the South. And so we're going to hear from our panelists, and each are at different phases of work and development in using the passing gear strategy. So the webinar will begin in just a moment. I'm going to give you a couple of instructions. One is, because there is a large number of participants, we'd appreciate it if you would please mute your phones by dialing *6. And if you have a question for one of the panelists as they start presenting, then you can unmute by pressing *7. And then please don't forget to mute again by pressing *6. So we're going to get started in just a moment with just kind of a general overview of passing gear philanthropy. So we'll wait just a moment and see if a few other people join us. All right. Well, I want to go ahead and get started because we have such an exciting panel and I don't want to compromise any of their time. Why don't we start by talking just a little bit about passing gear philanthropy, just to provide some context. So this notion of passing gear philanthropy is something that MDC is providing leadership around, and so each one of the panelists that you'll hear from today have been working with MDC under David Dodson's leadership. Many of you know that David Dodson and the MDC program do a State of the South report each year. And I remember years ago, probably somewhere around 2007, they did this really extraordinary State of the South report, which was focused on passing gear philanthropy. This was inspired by Paul Yilvasaker with the notion that philanthropy is a passing gear, and it was also informed by the concept of reflective practice as developed by Donald Schoen. This work is grounded in the belief that to wisely move into the future requires a deep understanding of our past and our present. In fact, it's based on the belief in value and wisdom of place. And I think we all know, being here in the South, that this work for the panelists is very deeply rooted in the South, and the work builds on the importance of community. In terms of the process, it's a unique approach to looking at community and regional history for lessons about leadership, change, and the role of philanthropy. It's a process that MDC has designed, tested, and refined, which provides facilitated inquiry, analysis, and planning by foundation boards and senior staff to help foundations understand the catalytic role that they can play to address the root causes of enduring challenges and ultimately to change community outcomes. So a part of this process includes intensive data analysis, as well as emerging issues and trends, which you'll hear more about when our panelists present, new philanthropic frameworks that deepen our understanding of the levers as well as the limitations of philanthropy, and then certainly the development of strategic priorities focused on lasting change in order to achieve each organization's mission. And then finally, before I introduce the panelists today, Passing Gears goals include the ability to partner with foundations and other philanthropic organizations to develop what's called habits of mind and skills that enable these organizations to create long-lasting change, to hopefully also inform philanthropic impulse in all citizens and communities, as importantly, to remind trustees and private donor groups that they are custodians of values as well as resources, and finally to empower those whose voices are often missing from public and philanthropic policy. So it's just so exciting for me and a pleasure to introduce Nina Waters. She's the president of the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida, based in Jacksonville, Florida. And it's a privilege for me, as president of Southeastern Council, to have the opportunity to work very closely with Nina as our chair of the board. Also, Jim Morton, president of Marion Sims Foundation, is based in Lancaster, South Carolina. And then Bob Morris has joined us as president of the Community Foundation of Greenville in Greenville, South Carolina. These are three extraordinary leaders with different perspectives and leadership opportunities in their communities using the Passing Gear strategy and approach. So it's my privilege and great pleasure to introduce them.
Thank you,
Nina,
Thank you.
Nina will be starting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janine. Okay, we're going to move to my section, which when we did Passing Gear Philanthropy in 2003, it was actually called Reflective Practice. And we did this on the eve of the 40th anniversary of the Community Foundation. We're the oldest community foundation in Florida. And our trustees made the decision to ask themselves, we've been in existence for 40 years, so what? What have we accomplished? What have we changed? And what do we want to look like going into the next 40 years of the foundation? So the challenging question was, what is our value proposition as the Communities Foundation? We hired David Dodson with MDC, as you've heard. David was in Jacksonville doing work with the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund and had been doing some work in our community already, and was just a terrific match for our board and where we are as a foundation at the time. We went through a very intensive 18-month process of reflection. We had 9 board meetings, 2 retreats on the end of each of those board meetings, which was really unheard of for our board, and they were intensive learning meetings. We asked ourselves the typical questions of reflective practice: what do we know, what don't we know, and what do we need to know? But I think the most important question of reflective practice is actually, what in the heck are we going to do with what we learn? So we then had, at the same time we decided to do this reflection, the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund commissioned a report. They used the University of Richmond to commission a report about our community. And in that, the nonprofits in our sector were asked about our foundation and their foundation and the work of those foundations. And the answers that came back are what you see on your screen. They said that the Community Foundation was inconsistent in its grant-making priorities, and we also were known for funding programs intended to enhance the quality of life for primarily middle and upper income citizens, in parentheses the arts, over targeting the least advantaged, which were social services programs. So when that came up, I was fairly new at the foundation, and that was kind of like waving a red cape in front of a bull. And so that helped to kind of energize our staff and board to say, you know, what does this mean for our community, but most importantly, what can the Community Foundation do to change that perception to be much more a part of the community? So as you know, getting in front of your board can be a scary thing, and so we had to bring the board along in the process. So through the 18-month process, David took us through several exercises, and they were very important. And one was that we created a timeline of philanthropy in our community. We compared it to the national context, and we looked at the growth of our community foundation over those 40 years and where national and local events really impacted the growth and the focus of our community foundation. One of the most powerful things he did is that he looked at the civic cholesterol, because what our board kept saying is, everything's fine, we're not in a crisis, we don't need to do a lot differently, our community is doing fine, and we just need to stay the course. And so David did this civic cholesterol where we took all of the cities that our Chamber of Commerce at the time was comparing us to, which you can see here on your screen, and he looked at several different indicators, and this is just one of the slides from that presentation that he did for our board. And his message to the board was, you are definitely not ill yet, but you are, if you look at these leading indicators, you are really headed for a heart attack. So do you want to get to that point, or do you want to do something about it now? And it really did help to mobilize the board. We also conducted 50 individual stakeholder interviews. We did literature reviews. We compiled and studied data. We visited other communities, which I think was extremely powerful. And we took trustees with us, small groups, to help them see that some of these community change initiatives were truly possible in communities, and to speak to other foundations. And then we conducted 12 focus groups, and that was with everything from clergy to high school students to elected officials and certainly nonprofit executives. And the questions we asked are, what are your perceptions of the current situation in our community, specifically in addressing needs of children and families, because that's where a lot of our field of interest dollars were at the time. We said, where should we focus as a community foundation? Where should we focus our work over the next decade? And what role should our community foundation play in that focus area? And then secondly is, how does a community foundation add value? And we used an outside facilitator to do this. We were not present in those conversations. And the model we used is, of the 4 choices you see on your screen right now, the 4 ways that foundations add value, and this is an old Porter Kramer article that I've given the site for you. There's 4 ways: selecting the best grantees, signaling other funders, improving the performance of grant recipients, or advancing the state of knowledge and practice. We assumed that the people in the focus groups, especially the nonprofits, would tell us that the best way that we could support and the biggest value we added would be to make grants. But actually, they told us number 4, advancing the state of knowledge and practice. And they said that's the way that we would add value the most. They specifically said that they wanted us to do that around public education, grades K through 12. And they wanted us to take on the role of a convener and provide a safe space to bring people to the table to generate knowledge and inform public education and reform with evidence. So they wanted us to use data and stay the long term. So that's what they were asking us to do, not make grants, but to actually advance the state of knowledge and practice around public education reform. So our board took a really deep breath. You know, we had been known for funding the arts, and we were not really a community leadership community foundation at the time. We were very much a vehicle, donor-advised community foundation. Our assets were about $50 million at the time we did this. And our board very carefully and with a lot of deliberation moved into the community leadership realm at that time. So here's what's happened. Moving into action, we launched the Quality Education for All initiative in 2005. We knew that we had to take a longer-term commitment to this. It couldn't be a 3-year initiative. We made a 10-year commitment of the majority of our discretionary money at the time. We don't have a lot of discretionary. So we used $200,000 a year. It's actually ended up being $3 million in the first 8 years because we've added more dollars to that. We had 3 prongs of work. Community learning, which is really convening, direct investment, which was making grants, and public policy and advocacy, which was really conducting polls, advocacy, and mobilizing the community. New things for our community foundation. I won't go into detail on that, but if you want more information about the initiative specifically, you can find all of that on our website. So what did we do? We created and capitalized a local education fund. That is our exit strategy for this education work. We're all community foundations. You can't go deeply into one area and stay in that area. So we created the infrastructure to sustain this work beyond our 10-year initiative. They are now 5 years old, and we capitalized them with a $3 million investment that we helped to raise, and they're now recapitalizing. We assisted in bringing KIP and Teach for America to Jacksonville as reform strategies. We launched and we're the primary funder of a Learning to Finish collaborative, which was to increase the graduation rate, and you'll see in a minute what happened with that. And we established the Quality Education for All Fund last month. We're going to have a super fund here in Jacksonville raised with $50 million from private donors, mostly foundations, that will be similar to what's happening in Charlotte and in Newark, where we're going to be spending $50 million to really address teacher and leader programs and education to promote great teachers and leaders. So the next slide talks about how did it change our work as grant makers, and how did reflective practice inform us differently. We know that we need to use data to inform our work, and we do it in a much richer way now than before we entered into this reflective practice work. We know that learning is doing, and sometimes your board and your staff falls trap into saying, you know, we don't really need to take time to study something. We really don't need to take time to ask these important questions about what do we know. But learning about your organization and learning about something that you need to be doing is doing, and it's important to talk to your board about that. We need to balance a community focus with a donor focus. All of us as community foundations struggle with that. You can't just be a leadership community foundation, in my opinion, or a donor-focused vehicle community foundation. It's really a both and not an either or, and you have to find the right balance for your community. You need to better align your staff with your organizational strategies. So you have to look at your staffing pattern, you have to look at your operating budget, and you need to say, where are we, what are our strategies with this, what have we learned, and how are we going to align our staff. We did the cost study as part of this as well, and if you haven't done that, it's a great tool, and it does help you to align staff when you look at the cost of each of your initiatives. And then we deploy resources differently. We go much deeper on subjects, so we do deep versus wide, and we do long-term strategies and not short-term strategies for the most part as a result of what we learned about where we were the most effective in making grants. The other things that we learned is that we have to focus. We have limited discretionary dollars, and I think a lot of community foundations in the South, that's probably true as well. And so focus, 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 and staying focused was really important. We needed to use multiple strategies to address those focus areas. You can't just have one strategy when you're addressing something like public education reform or poverty or race relations. And you have to align those strategies so that each one supports the other. That sounds pretty simple. It's a little harder to do in practice. You have to develop a plan for sustainability. What's your exit strategy to get out of this once you get into it? And you have to treat your grantees as partners. You really need to ask them about what works, but most importantly, what didn't work, and you have to build that level of trust so that they'll be honest with you and you can learn as you're doing the work. We have much greater flexibility now that we've been through reflective practice. We know that it's a journey, and we know that there's a lot of course corrections as you're applying this learning to doing. And so we are much more flexible with grant contracts, with timelines. We extend grants a lot more than we did. We do our interim site visits in person now because we learn from them. And we also now, where we have bodies of work, we have all the grantees get together for their interim site visits to learn from each other in that field of interest. So we don't have a lot of paper reporting now. We have a lot more conversations with grantees. And then I would say that, you know, our board was really nervous about stepping out on this issue in 2004 after we went through reflective practice and said, are we going to upset some people? Are we going to upset our donors? You know, should we stick our neck out on public education reform? Should we talk about issues about race and the achievement gap? And I would say to you that I think there's a cost for not sticking your neck out because community foundations more than ever really have to demonstrate their relevance in the community, and there's nothing like this that helps you be able to do that very well. So what does our foundation look like today? We've grown from $69 million to $257 million in the past 10 years. And our investment in public education reform just in the last 8 years, our $3 million has leveraged $25 million. And now we've raised an additional $31 million. So there's a lot of private investment in public education that wasn't there before. And so is our community any better off? Yes. We have a public education reform infrastructure that's necessary to sustain the work beyond our initial investment. We have a very visionary superintendent and a much higher functioning school board. We did get involved in school board elections as part of our advocacy work. We're much more engaged with the public through some on-the-ground community mobilization initiatives that you can read about there on our website. Our high school graduation rate has increased 16 percentage points over the past 5 years, and you can see the increase in students that are college ready. So I would say that reflective practice really taught us to be much more bold and much more of a community leadership community foundation, and it taught us the right questions to ask as we were going along and how to learn and apply that learning to doing as we moved forward. So that's the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida. And I think J. Marion Sims is next. Or are we going to ask for questions individually or as we go along?
Yeah, why don't we take just a moment for any questions from the group for you, Nina, and then we'll come back to Jim. And please remember to *7 to unmute.
I was so comprehensive, there are no questions.
Yeah.
Nina?
Yes.
This is Heather Larkin in Little Rock.
Hey, Heather.
How are you?
Good.
Do you and your board, do y'all trace your growth and your funds, your development growth directly to this? I mean, do you actually say that, or do you just see it as a small byproduct?
No, I think we can absolutely trace it to this when you look at the funds that have come in and who those donors are. And so where I will tell you that we have upset a few donors with our advocacy work moving forward, there are many more donors that now say, gosh, if the Community Foundation can do this around education, maybe they can do this for community theaters, or maybe they can do this for the environment. And so they're coming to us much more for our expertise and our ability to connect donors to causes they care about because they've seen what we've been able to do around education.
Did you have to do a lot of individual work with board members to bring them along where they could stick their neck out, or did working with David, did that kind of fall out just through the process, or was it on your shoulders?
That's a good question. Working with David helped to do it because it was someone from outside, and he created that sense of urgency, and he was able to talk a lot about how the field was growing and changing and what the role of being the Community Foundation was. The civic cholesterol piece helped a lot. And also, they had a piece that came out in 2004 around Brown versus the Board of Education, and there was some really sobering stats about men and young black males in the South and what was happening. There were more black males in prison than in college, and so we were able to bring some of that information to them to say, we are in a place in time where we can't continue to go along just funding the arts and things that are for more well-situated people. We need to step out and we need to see where it's going to go. But I will say that you have to have, the board has to be part of this reflective practice process where some of the agencies in Jacksonville made a mistake when they went through it, a few of them, is they did it just with the staff and a consultant, and they involved the board at the end. And you cannot do it that way, in my opinion. Your board has got to be knee-deep in it with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for those questions. Why don't we go ahead and move to Jim Morton now, President of J. Marion Sims.
Okay. Thank you very much, Janine, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk just a little bit about our foundation's experience with Passing Gear Philanthropy. As Janine mentioned, we are a private foundation, but like you as community foundations, we are very much place-based in our philanthropy because we fund in our community and in two adjacent small communities. To give you a little bit of background about us, our foundation was formed in 1995 from the sale of our local hospital. We are located in Lancaster, South Carolina, which is about 30 miles south of Charlotte, North Carolina, and we've experienced a good bit of growth recently from the Charlotte area. And we have approximately 80,000 people within our giving area. Our giving area consists of Lancaster County and two small communities in Chester County, which is just across the Catawba River from us, that were part of the hospital's service area, and we kept that to be our giving area. So as I say, like you, we're very definitely rooted in one place, and the grants that we make are to benefit those people who live within that area. As a Health Legacy Foundation, our primary emphasis has been on health and wellness, but we do tend to interpret that broadly and have made any number of grants for educational purposes, for social service work, in addition to health and wellness in our community. We make both responsive and strategic grants, and beginning in 2002, our major strategic emphasis has been adult literacy and basic skills. We've been at that work now for over 10 years, and we've been through 3 different grant-making phases and cycles within it. And we're about to wind that down over the next couple of years. And as we saw that finish line coming into focus, we asked ourselves the question, what's next? And we really, that question for us was more than just saying, well, let's do a strategic plan, or let's choose another target now for some strategic grant making. We really wanted to take a look at the fact that we've been around. At the time that we began kicking this around, we'd been around for about 15 years, and we knew that within those 15 years that our community had changed substantially. We've experienced a great deal of population growth. You were the 5th in the 2010 census. We were the 5th fastest growing county in South Carolina. We have had an influx of retirees into our community. The Del Webb Company has established a Sun City retirement development in the northern part of our county. That's added a lot of talent. It's also added a lot of questions and a lot of new element to our community. And we've experienced, as have a number of small southern communities, job losses related to plant closings, primarily in the textile industry and some non-textile industries that went by the wayside during our recent sharp economic downturn called the Great Recession in some quarters. Of course, there were corresponding job losses to those. Our unemployment in our community spiked as high as 19%, and it's still several points above our state average, hovering around 11%. And we experienced, as did most of us, substantial losses in our investment portfolio. Part of that, of course, due to the market drops, but also some due to accelerated grant making that we did during our difficult times. We increased our grant making in order to help meet needs in our community, and so we don't have quite the asset base that we entered the late 2000s with. Some of the questions that we wanted to ask ourselves as we went through this pause and reflecting period were, look back at what have we done? How have we fulfilled our mission? How has our community changed? How have we changed as a foundation, as an organization? Is who we are and what we're doing what our community most needs? Is our mission still relevant today? Did it need to be expanded or changed? How can we best fulfill it in the future? And how can we have greater impact? And we wanted all of that to be driven by data. Certainly, Nina talked about the importance of data in their process, and we also wanted data to play a crucial role in informing us in what we would take a look at doing. We discovered that MDC had their passing gear philanthropy model that fit what we were looking for just to a T. So we began that in October of 2011 and went through it over about 10 months through a number of board and staff meetings, a couple of board retreats and conversations. And what we found was that the process for us was a real eye-opener. We have a number of people on our board who are natives of Lancaster, have grown up there, spent their lives there. Others of them are people who have come to the community from other places. Some of us were raised in the community and then left and then have come back. And building that timeline that Nina spoke of, and it is an important part of the Passing Gear Philanthropy process, was really important for us. It allowed us to identify important events and turning points in our community's history, to identify the origins and learn more about the origins of some institutions that have been there for a long time, but that we kind of took for granted or didn't really know how they began or why they began. We looked at how our community had handled race, growth, progress, and all of us, as it turned out, knew pieces, some pieces, but none of us, of course, knew everything, and all of us learned a great deal from each other. And we also learned that what we didn't know that we didn't know, and we found out that that was quite a bit. We looked at how our community views itself. We looked at who our community's leaders have been and who our community's leaders are today, and where there are some gaps in leadership. One of the things that our community faces is kind of a leadership drain, and we do have some gaps that we need to address. And we need to look at, or we looked at what needed to change for things to get better in our community in the long term. Again, it was driven by data. We looked at the data we had. We asked for and got more data. And in reviewing what we had done with our grant making, we came to understand that in the past we had focused primarily on relief of some social ills and concerns, particularly during the recession. And we had also focused some, as through our initiative in adult literacy and basic skills, on improvement. And we determined that going forward we want to focus less on relief, more on improvement, and the scary part, venture into change, really looking at being a change agent. So this involved for us an internal review and view of ourselves and beginning to discover our potential, developing an emphasis on fostering long-term change. And we found that in our community, the areas that were most pressing and relevant for us to become involved with are, as you can imagine, health as a Health Legacy Foundation, education, and also economic development. And the other thing that we decided that we want to do is become a catalyst for a community visioning process. We think, given where our community has been, where it is now, and the changes that will come in the future, that it's important for the community to go through a visioning process and use some of the same elements that we as a foundation used in Passing Gear Philanthropy. We also want to expand and develop our own capacity for working with data and using that as a framework for using and sharing data to inform and educate the community, to develop support for whatever initiatives we may undertake, and to serve as the foundation for a visioning process in our community. And for us to be heavily involved in that is going to necessitate a shift from us being a grant maker to also being more of a community leader than perhaps we have been. It's an ongoing process. We will be asking ourselves and are asking ourselves how and where can we best use our philanthropic capital, its various forms that it can take. And we know from talking with other foundations and who have been through this process and are farther ahead of it than we are, that there are a number of elements that are going to be important because the implementation of it is challenging and does require flexibility. It's going to require good data. It's going to require tolerance for trial and error and being willing to perhaps make some mistakes along the line and be willing to own up to those and address them. It will involve ongoing learning. It will involve engaging our community, and it will definitely involve patience as we go forward. We have hit a little bit of a stumbling block. We thought we would be a little farther along than we are right now, but because of an unfortunate internal situation that we've had to deal with, we're a little bit behind where we thought we would be at this point. But we're about to have that fully resolved and be able to move forward now and pick up and regain some momentum. So we're excited about where we think we may be going with this, but we're also approaching it with a little bit of trepidation, as you can also imagine. Be glad to take any questions that anybody might have.
All right, we'll open for a couple of questions for Jim. You can star 7 to unmute.
Once again, I apparently did as good a job as Nina did.
All right, well, we'll hold and we'll move to Bob Morris, and there will be another place for questions at the end. So if you have questions, please note those, and we'll now hear from Bob Morris.
Okay, we came out a little differently than Jim and Nina. The Community Foundation in Greenville had its first strategic plan in 2010, and probably like a lot of community foundations' strategic plans, it was really based on developing assets, outreach to professional advisors. We had an asset goal to get to $50 million by the end of next year, and we had some tactics, like having a legacy society and all those kinds of things, but we really weren't focused on data that identified issues in the community. It was really more of a, a plan-giving asset development kind of plan. We did agree to invest $100,000 each year in a series of interest areas, and the reason we did that was if someone had an interest in the arts, we wanted to be able to say, okay, we've got an arts portfolio, or we have an environmental portfolio, in addition to our health and human services and educational portfolios. So that was, about as much depth as we went into on that. And then we had a hope that we could attract some funding from national and regional foundations. We've talked a lot about David. The United Way in Greenville had David come 2 years ago to do a kind of an abbreviated version of the reflective practices, and they had incorporated some of his work into their grant making. So some of our boards overlap with the United Way, and we have some common areas of interest. So we felt really comfortable with David, in addition to knowing him from the Southeastern Council meetings. And, our goals, we had 3 goals, and we had 3 primary, instead of just being the community foundation engaging in this strategy, we partnered with the United Way and a relatively new foundation in Greenville called the Hollingsworth Funds, which is about a $300 million foundation. Each of us were in a place where we wanted to refresh our strategic initiatives, and these are the goals that we had: to strengthen relationship among funders, not just the United Way and Hollingsworth Funds, but also some of the private foundations and corporate funders in Greenville, and to capture this history and diversity in the timeline, to use some data so we could understand our community, and to have the philanthropic framework of philanthropy as relief, improvement, social reform, and civic engagement as a common language to discuss some of the things that are going on. We're also using it, as a way to discuss things like, should we provide operating support and capital campaign, how do you build capacities for nonprofits, things like that. But the framework we're most focusing on is the MDC framework on philanthropy. I think the only thing kind of new about, probably every community has this, but our Chamber of Commerce has a lot of data about per capita income and, bachelor attainment rate, high school graduation rates, and things like that. And then our hospital systems have a lot of information about healthcare outcomes and, access and affordability. And we have some information based on some of the work that we've done, but we didn't really have a way to coordinate all 3 of those entities and what they were looking at. So that was an important part of getting that together before we actually met. We just had our first meeting, the retreat, was at the end of April of this year, so we're very early in this. But since we have 3 organizations that are driving it, we've got, I've got 30 people on my board. United Way has probably, 10 people on its executive committee. Hollingsworth Funds has 7 trustees. We ended up having about 40 people in the meeting. So it's not been a problem, but it's just challenging to kind of to allow people to express how they feel about things and to come at it from their different organizations. In that April 29th retreat, we also included executive directors from about 15 of our local nonprofits to get their take on what the data that was being presented meant to them in their daily work with folks. And I think that's kind of a new twist to this. What a lot of the nonprofits said was, we think that this group should be even more inclusive, that there are many people that are not represented at this discussion. And that's been kind of a tension, because from our perspective at Hollingsworth and the United Way, we are trying to coalesce the funders, to bring the private foundations and the corporate foundations in with us, and there's a time to do that, and then a time to be inclusive after this smaller group kind of understands what it's going to do and what its common strategies are going to be. And there, of course, going to be some foundations where this doesn't fit. They're not really interested in the work that we're doing because they're family-driven and they're used to responding to things based on what the family is involved with. So the annual grant distributions of the 3 partners, United Way here locally raises about $16 million a year. Some of that is designated, but a good percentage of it is undesignated. The Hollingsworth Funds is a supporting organization. It supports Furman University, the YMCA, and then the Community Foundation, and its total grant making is $4.5 million a year. And then our unrestricted grant making is around $250,000 a year. So while we're not really equal in the sense that we're not able to bring the same financial resources to the table, but of course people look at us as being more independent than the other partners. If you look at the grants from all 3 of our foundations, we've all supported many of the same things, but it hasn't ever been, because of a coordinated, intentional. It's just that, things kind of fall out that way. Now we have 3, for us, that were pretty significant collaborations between the local funders. One is the Greenville Early College, and this is a new middle school and high school that's going to work with families who've not been to college to get their kids ready during middle school to attend a dual credit high school. It's all the same school, and the school district is paying the per pupil fee, and then the private funders have put about $1 million into the pot to help get the school started. Community Works is started as a housing initiative, but now includes micro-lending, IDA programs, things like that. And it's been well supported by many of the foundations in the community. And then the Greenville Region Workforce Collaborative is an issue to help get hard-to-employ folks into advanced manufacturing positions and get ready for that. And that's been supported by, Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation has come from North Carolina to help us with that, and it's done really well. So we had some prior collaborative investments, and we know that, the 3 folks that are kind of organizing this, will continue to cooperate and collaborate, but we didn't have a way to include the other private foundations and corporate foundations. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this. And I think, since we're so early in the process, and we've also got, some of the people couldn't be at the very first meeting that are coming to convening again after July 4th week. It's just, we're trying to show leadership and provide direction, but not actually to say we've got an agenda that we want you to participate in. And that's just, we don't want to give someone the impression that we are, getting ready to put something in front of them. We really want to get their ideas on how they can collaborate. There are two things I think that, big questions that are going to be looked at. One is, do we go for place-based funding? And by that I mean, we've got certain neighborhoods, of course, that have lots of challenges. And if we pick a neighborhood to work with, then our funders that are interested in the arts or the environment may have a way to participate with us and create strategies to improve those neighborhoods. Or do we look at issue-based funding, which kind of naturally flows out of the data that David helped us go through? That's, Nina, I don't think we have do we have more males in college than in prison? That didn't come up. But the data is pretty similar, I think, as far as, high school attainment rates, healthcare access, those kinds of things. And is there one of those that's more compelling than the other, or one of those that's more ripe for investment? So I think by the 2014 conference, we'll have some really good results to share with how it's gone so far. But I know that I've been pleased. My board chair has been pleased so far. And we're hoping that the other groups that we're trying to bring in will attach, to the effort. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. We're going to open up at this point for a few questions. We have about 15 minutes left, and so we'd love to hear from you. Thank you all for being on. Please star 7 to unmute.
Shall we go ahead? You have a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Would you announce who you are?
This is Betsy Covington from the Community Foundation in Columbus, Georgia. And I'm not sure to which I'd prefer to address this question. Y'all field it if you want to. But how would you respond to board members who see a need for an overall strategic planning process for the organization as opposed to a passing gear philanthropy planning process? What do you see as being the differences, advantages, disadvantages?
Betsy, this is Nina, and I'll start anyway with that. I think that it's part of the process, so it's actually a way of doing work. So passing gear philanthropy or reflective practice actually changes the way you work every day. And so asking these questions is part of the discovery process of your strategic planning process. So it's kind of one tool in that toolbox. And then it's a way that you work all, in between each strategic plan. But you still have other things like the cost study that would be a really important data point to inform your work. The community scan that reflective practice helps you do is certainly an important part of strategic planning. So I'd say that it's sort of almost the basis of it, and then you can take the other things that you need to develop it. Certainly out of this, it wasn't just that we decided to focus on education. We had a really robust 5-year strategic plan that came out of the reflective practice process. I just focused on how we changed from sort of a vehicle community foundation to a community change community foundation, but there were other development goals and things like that that were part of it as well. Did that answer your question at all?
Thank you. That was helpful. If either of the other two have anything to add, that would be great. But, Nina, I appreciate your thoughts as always.
I've only worked for a community foundation, so, the importance of raising additional funds has always been, a big part of what I do. And, that's not really addressed by the reflective practice, except for that you're more clearly defining that you are an organization that is focusing in on the most impactful things that you can do with your discretionary dollars. So when we we're still going to have to refresh our strategic plan at the end of this initial 5-year period, and a lot of this will help inform that. But the things that are about the more tactics of development, we'll just have to continue to focus on that as well.
I think this is Jim. I think for us, what this has done is provide us a strong framework from which we will now ask some more detailed questions and ask and answer a number of strategic questions and make some strategic decisions. I don't think it's a substitute for a strategic plan, and I have to issue a disclaimer. I hate the term strategic plan. I just can't stand it, and that's one reason I try to shy away from it. But it will form the basis for some strategic conversation, some strategic question asking, and some strategic decision making as we go along.
And the only kind of additional comment I'll make about our thought process of going through this is that we see some younger, 40 and 50 being younger, foundation trustees starting to take on more decision making at their private foundations, and so we think they're ready to kind of go through this process as we look at the folks that are here. Unfortunately, on the corporate foundation side of it, we've pretty much lost most of our headquartered companies. There are a few that are still here, but it's not like it was 5 or 10 years ago. So, I'm not sure that the corporate folks are a priority, but they're being included.
Thank you so much. I think what we'll do, we appreciate the questions, and we're going to move into the next slide. And I'm going to ask Betsy Covington to talk a little bit about this upcoming webinar in October.
Excellent. Well, aren't I talking more than I had intended on this call? But I'm pleased to hear that there are a number of people who are listening today, and I'll urge you to mark your calendars for this next webinar in October. One of the things that we wanted to address were some of the nuts and bolts questions that seem to come up over and over again as we talk to each other. Staff size, asset size, methods of investing, how you compensate your employees, fee structure, all of those things. We've got a questionnaire that will be making its way to you, and I see you've got the link on the slide here. I hope that you'll take no more than 5 minutes to complete the survey. This will help us inform our agenda for the day. If any of you have things you'd especially like to hear about, you may email me or call me, and my contact information is on the questionnaire. Likewise, if you at your community foundation have gone through issues that you think you'd be interested in sharing with your colleagues, please message me there as well, too. We're looking for great speakers for the day and hoping to follow up on today's success. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Betsy. All right, so we are moving toward close, and we promise to have you off in an hour, and we appreciate all of your questions and interest in this particular webinar. We want to thank our panelists today, Nina Waters, Jim Morton, and Bob Morris. You all did such an extraordinary job. And as Nina pointed out, there's information on her website. I would imagine, Jim and Bob, you have information on your website as well if people have additional questions. Is it okay if they call you?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So I just wanted to make one final announcement. We do have a really wonderful webinar that's coming up, and this is probably exactly the time of year for us to be hosting such a webinar on hurricanes in the Southeast and the 2013 hurricane season forecast. This is being brought to you by the Southeastern Council of Foundations in close collaboration with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. And I think probably many of you, although all of you may not know on the call, that a couple of our members actually helped to create the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. So we're very excited to be working in partnership with them. This webinar will be hosted on Thursday, June 27th. It will be 12 p.m. Eastern Time or 11 a.m. Central Time. You can register on our website at secf.org/disaster webinar. And there's going to be a very exciting panel there as well with Robert Ottenhoff, the President and CEO of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. We have Lori Burtman, President and CEO of the Irene W. and C.B. Pennington Foundation. Also Mark Brewer, the President and CEO of Community Foundation of Central Florida, and Jerry Bell. He's a hurricane climate specialist and research meteorologist. So this should be a very exciting webinar as well. We want to thank all of our members who were able to join us. And if you're not a member of SECF and you've been on this call, we'd love to have your membership. So thank you all very much. And I want to extend a very special thank you to Gabrielle Namihas and also Helen Ishii, our membership director. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Please stand by.